Buenos días, queridos amigos de la Fábrica de la Ciencia. Hoy tenemos de invitado a Mark Lehner, es un egiptólogo, uno de los principales egiptólogos de la historia reciente del mundo de la egiptología, y nos va a hablar de todo lo que podemos encontrar en la meseta de Giza, las pirámides, la Esfinge, los templos, las mastabas. Todo nos lo va a explicar porque, repito, es una de las personas que actualmente más sabe de las pirámides porque lleva ya muchos años excavando en este lugar. Seguro que nos va a hablar de la ciudad de los obreros, de la Esfinge y de otros monumentos más representativos, como no, de la Gran Pirámide que nos podemos encontrar en la llanura de Giza. Tengo que agradecer nuestra colaboración con Alicia Flores, que va a hacer de traductora, y a los seguidores de la fábrica y a los nuevos seguidores de la fábrica deciros que la traducción simultánea con subtítulos en castellano últimamente nos está causando unos pequeños problemas, y podéis recurrir tranquilamente al traductor directo de YouTube, que luego os dejaré las indicaciones para que podáis ver el vídeo y traducirlo con subtítulos. Y ahora os voy a dejar con Mark Lehner para hablar de la meseta de Giza y quiénes construyeron las pirámides.
Good morning. We are here with Mark Lehner, which is a great honor. Welcome, Mark, to La Fábrica de la Ciencia. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Thank you.
Okay, so, well, let's start the interview. We all know that you have been working in Giza for a long time. What are the main areas of your research?
Well, so I've been working in Egypt a long time, 50 years. I've focused at the pyramids of Giza. I've worked all over Egypt in different archaeological projects, but my concentration has been at Giza, the pyramids, the Sphinx. And, you know, I started out at the Sphinx. The Great Sphinx was really my breakout project. The American Research Center in Egypt adopted me, took me on, and sponsored me to do a survey of the Sphinx and to map the Sphinx stone by stone. This was in 1979 to 1983. And in many ways, the Sphinx was kind of a key that unlocked the mysteries of the Giza Plateau for me. And for me, those mysteries involve the people. Who were the people who built the pyramids? And after starting a project to map the entire Giza Plateau to understand how they built the pyramids, where are the quarries, where are the pyramids, I realized that I had to turn my back to the pyramids and look away from them to understand them. Why? Because if you don't understand the people of a civilization and a culture, whether it's Spain or America or modern Egypt, you don't really understand their monuments, because it's the people who made these things. And specifically, I started wondering, if it took thousands of workers to build the pyramids, where did they live? How were they housed? How were they fed? And if we could excavate their settlement where they actually lived, not where they buried their dead, what would that excavation, what would that archaeology tell us about their everyday lives? How were they organized? The footprint of their settlement might tell us. Would we expect like a campsite? Would we expect something like an army campsite? Or would we expect very organized housing? Nobody knew. And so starting in about 1988, my research took a very particular focus on settlement archaeology. To the south of the Great Sphinx, about 400 meters, we predicted, based on our survey of the whole plateau, Where are the quarries? Where are the pyramids? Where's the delivery for everything from outside the Giza Plateau? Where's the harbor? We predicted that about 400 meters south of the Sphinx, we should find the lost city of the pyramids. And you know, lost city is used a lot in archaeology, but it's not inappropriate here because nobody knew the city was there. And we found a big part of it, covering about 10 hectares. So for the last 37 years, my focus has been specifically on excavating that settlement, not where the ancient Egyptians buried their dead, but where they lived their lives, to build the Great Pyramids. And as part of doing that, it's a different kind of archaeology than finding mummies and gold bowls. We save every scrap of animal bone. We save ancient plant remains. And we want to know, what were they consuming? How were they fed? How were they housed? As part of doing that over the many years, my organization, Ancient Egypt Research Associates, or AERA, we started a field school to teach this kind of interdisciplinary archaeology to young Egyptians, young Egyptian archaeologists working for Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities. And so this has been our passion, the field school, settlement excavation, trying to find the people, the real people of the pyramids. And the motto of our field school is, we are not looking for things. We are looking for information. And that takes a team.
Wow, that sounds very good. Thanks for this amazing reply, because now I wonder how to pose the next question, because you have mentioned many important things that I wanted to talk about. You have mentioned the Sphinx. Okay, so as we all know, the funerary complexes of Giza are not just composed by the pyramids, but also the processional causeways, funerary temples, valley temples, mastabas, etc. But also there is only one unique element that only appears in the complex of Khafra, which is the Sphinx.
Right.
So what is your opinion about that? Why is there only one Sphinx of these dimensions and it doesn't occur elsewhere in the complex of Giza?
Well, the Sphinx is very unusual. And I worked there almost 3 years. And, what I realized is how unusual the Sphinx is. There have been so many postcards, so many photographs taken by tourists of the Sphinx. We think, the Sphinx it's old hat. Everybody knows it. But for its time, nobody had ever done anything like that before. But this was an age when the ancient Egyptians were just starting to build giant pyramids. You have the first gigantic pyramid of Djoser, the step pyramid at Saqqara. Within maybe 2 generations, Snefru, the father of Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid, he's doing all the research and development on how to make a giant pyramid, how to make a pyramid that's colossal in size. So Snefru actually builds 3 giant pyramids, and in one of those pyramids is kind of 2 pyramids in one, the pyramid at Meidum, where it was a step pyramid, and then he completed it. If you think about it, over some 40 to 50 years, maybe 48 years, Snefru did all the research and development that made the Great Pyramid of Khufu possible. And then the Great Pyramid of Khufu itself is totally unique, like the Great Sphinx, made, I think, by his son, Khafre. Nobody tried to make internal chambers like Khufu. Before, they had never built on solid bedrock. They were building on soft clay bedrock or gravel and sand. So Khufu is totally unique. His pyramid is the biggest of all. And then you have a son reigning between Khufu and Khafre, who made the second pyramid of Giza. You have Jedefra. He goes north to a different site, Abu Rawash, and does something totally different. And we can talk about that. But it's almost like a blip, an interruption, because Khafre comes back and he builds a pyramid almost equal in size to his father's Khufu. And what he adds at the base of the causeway of his pyramid, right next to his valley temple, is the Great Sphinx. And he carves it right out of the natural rock. You know, we have these heads of presidents in America and South Dakota, Mount Rushmore. They're carved out of granite, but Khafre is carving the Sphinx at a colossal scale, right out of bedrock. Nobody had done this before. But you see, this was an age of experimentation. Snefru is experimenting with how you go from a step pyramid to a true pyramid. Khufu is experimenting how to build the biggest pyramid of all. And then Khafre, he adds this unique thing, the Great Sphinx, made out of bedrock. Nobody made a statue of that scale until the New Kingdom, with one possible exception. My Egyptologist colleagues cite an exception of a Middle Kingdom series, couple statues in the Fayum at Biamu. But really, it's in the New Kingdom. Think about it. You have Abu Simbel, made by Ramses II, carved right out of the natural rock. You have the Colossi of Memnon, giant. And I believe what another Egyptologist, Rainer Stadelmann, suggested. He said, in fact, they might have been inspired in the New Kingdom 1,200 years after the time of Giza pyramids. They might have been inspired to make these colossal statues by the Great Sphinx, because we know they excavated the Sphinx, they cleared it, they restored it 1,200 years later in the New Kingdom. So why did it's not just a question of why did nobody else make a giant Sphinx at the bottom of their causeway? It's more of a question, why are they just experimenting on such a colossal, explosive scale? And you know, it's kind of like our space program after World War II. Both the American space program, the Russians, European space program, it just really took off where we, did Sputnik, the Russians, and then we put people on the moon. And then it was a burst of new developments, innovations, pioneering in new directions. The Old Kingdom and the Pyramid Age is kind of like that. Because after the Giza pyramids, the gigantic pyramids at Giza, in the 5th dynasty, and especially in the 6th dynasty, pyramids became more and more standardized. They were focusing on other things. They were focusing on developing the nation as a whole. But I will say this, the fact that the Great Sphinx of Giza sits at the base of the Khafre Causeway, the causeway running from Khafre's Upper Pyramid Temple down to his Valley Temple, which is very well preserved. And the Sphinx is sitting right there. It's part of that whole ensemble. It is the case that other pharaohs like Sahure and other 5th dynasty pharaohs in 6th dynasty as well carved sphinxes at the bottoms of their causeway, but in the reliefs, in the picture program, in the corridor, the inside of the causeway. And those sphinxes have one paw raised like this, and they're trampling on enemies. Okay. So they did put those sphinxes at the base of their causeways, but they're carved in relief and they're trampling enemies. Why? Because I think the Sphinx was what we call apopotreic. It was to ward off evil. But anyway, that's a long answer to your question about
no. It's
how unusual
but it's very interesting, and indeed the presence of the Sphinx, it was not present like a colossal statue, but it was present in the reliefs. So indeed, we can say that there were sphinxes, but the kind of representation changed and evolved as the construction of the pyramids themselves. And it's very interesting for me from also a technical point of view to visualize, because I'm not an expert in pyramids. It's not my field of expertise, but from a technical point of view, it's very interesting for me to notice how it evolves, how they experiment at the beginning, and they find better ways than others to get to a more or less standardization of the process of the construction, of the costs, of the materials, and how they set different criteria to perform this kind of jobs, this kind of works.
Well, it's an interesting comment, because you use the word how it evolves. And there seems to be this point counterpoint between things evolving and developing and then things just like bursting, like a sudden explosion. For example, it's interesting that we don't really have a series of sphinxes that get closer and closer and closer to the Great Sphinx of Giza. You do have sphinxes that might be older. There's one head in the Louvre, of Jeddah. They say it might be a sphinx because there's a turning out at the back of the headdress, like the back of a lion.
Yeah.
There might be a little faience sphinx in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, made out of faience from the early dynastic. If you check it out, it's on their website. You can, if I give you the accession number, it's called a kneeling man. There's another sphinx that was painted yellow, and it has almond-like eyes from Abu Rawash, again, Jeddah complex. So we have these, but there's not really a whole progression. Maybe we're missing it. There's not really a whole progression where they're building up to this great sphinx made out of the bedrock. And just like the giant pyramids of Snefru and Khufu and Khafre, it's kind of an explosion. And then things develop out of it, like the Sphinx is carved in relief inside the causeways of later pyramid complexes. So you do see development in Egyptian art and architecture, but you also see these interesting explosions. And I think you see that in cultural evolution everywhere, or cultural development all over the planet, not just from ancient Egypt. I think it's a characteristic of civilization.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. I was talking more about the evolution of the pyramids of the because there is a clear evolution there, in not only in the shape of the pyramids itself, but also in the construction methodology, the size, and also we have to also take into account that there was a religion motive behind the iconographical. I mean, there is a whole background, cultural background behind all these decisions that need to be taken into account. It's not only the technical point of view. And also talking about the workers' village. Well, that's one of the most interesting discoveries of the recent times, and you have talked about it. What are the most interesting findings, or what is your favorite part of it, about the things that you have found, the work itself? What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's called the Workers' Village, and it's partly my own fault, the fault of our team, because we called it the Workers' Town, Workers' Village. But, as we exposed it over an area of about 10 hectares, it was not exactly what we expected. In the middle of the site, there's something we call the gallery complex, because it's 4 big blocks of what look like corridors, galleries. They're about the width of a hotel corridor, and they're like 35 meters long, 3 of the blocks, and then the northern block is 55 meters long. In the backs of these galleries, we found what looked like houses, and in the very far back, behind the little houses, we find chambers for cooking, roasting, and baking, like kitchens. But the fronts of these galleries are largely empty. We know that there were posts supporting a kind of loft or canopy. So it's like a colonnade, a series of, and these were wooden posts. We have the base, we have the stone pads that the posts sat upon. We have where they, hold the posts up to take them away when they abandoned the site, but they left the circle in the clay. So we know that they were about 23, 24 centimeters made of wood. But why just this big empty corridor? That's what we wondered. And then when we excavated them, one of them and then 2 of them in great detail, we found sleeping platforms. We know these little platforms, they're like inclined beds, where you lift your head up. Other archaeologists had already excavated such platforms, sleeping platforms, in houses of the New Kingdom, in the houses of the Middle Kingdom, and even Old Kingdom. So we said, Oh, these houses were for, people to sleep. And these galleries, the galleries for people to sleep. And that explained why all around the gallery complex we were finding bakeries, dozens of bakeries, and so much waste from bread baking that there must have been enough bread being baked to feed thousands of people. Plus, where we excavated in detail, like 10%, most of what we mapped, we could map just the walls showed when we removed the sand that had covered the site. The walls showed on the surface of the ruins. But
Mhm.
where we excavated deeply and we saved every bit of animal bone, it looked like people were eating lots of prime beef, lots of meat. So who were these consumers? And that was a big question. If these were barracks, then that would explain so much production of protein and carbohydrates, what
Mhm.
hard work needs. So we had the hypothesis that these are the barracks for the workers rotating in and out of work. So workers, doesn't look like a village. Villages have winding paths, but even in Spain, villages, have very traditional winding paths. And so, no, this looks very modern. It looks like the streets or the grid of Chicago or Manhattan.
Okay.
And then all around it are these bakeries. But then further away, south, we found what we think are the houses of those who are in charge. These are big houses, like 400 square meters, big houses for our time. And in those houses, we found evidence of very high status. We found mud ceilings, where they would seal bags, boxes, jars, and doors with a string lock, and then they would put some clay around it, and they would roll a cylinder impressed with hieroglyphs, and it would leave an impression on the string lock of a door, a bag, a box, or a jar with cloth cover. So these are like the old-fashioned wax letter sealings, like we used to use.
Okay.
And when they would open the bag, the box, the jar, or the door, these ceilings would break apart, and sometimes they would collect all the pieces with their hieroglyphs. So we have a whole team that, with the patience of Job, the biblical
Yeah.
reference, they take these tiny little pieces of clay and they put them together like a puzzle. And of course, they use the same seal impression more than once, so they could start to see patterns. And I'm amazed at the patience of this team, because they could actually reconstruct the original cylinder seal that made the impression. They could reconstruct the whole design. And they gave titles of some of the highest ranking people we know from the tombs, and the titles of people, high ranking people in their tombs, like overseer of all the king's works. There are even titles like overseer of the scribes, of the tutors, of the royal children. And, so both the size of the houses, the fact that we're finding these ceilings, and a lot of other evidence that they're eating really good prime beef,
Mhm.
said these are some of the highest ranking officials of the land who are there in their official residence or their residential office. Because the ancient Egyptians, even in the time 1,200 years later, in the time of Tutankhamun and Akhenaten, they didn't differentiate between the house and the office so much.
Mhm.
So this is where these high-ranking people lived and administrated the workforce that was rotating through the galleries. And so it's not quite accurate to call it a workers' village.
Yeah.
And so we began, then there was one other finding, and I'll say it very briefly. As we were doing flotation, flotation is where you take dirt and you put it in a barrel filled with water, and the dirt goes down through different mesh sizes, and you
Yeah.
screen out the
Osmosis.
finest material is charcoal, plant remains that have been charred, but the charcoal didn't dissolve. And again, with the patience of Job, we have another team that looks at the plant remains under a microscope, and like a little border collie, they herd out pieces of wheat, barley, even field weeds. And what we started finding in the charcoal was a lot of acacia, because that was the common tree that grew in Egypt, and they were burning their trees with abandon. The pyramids were thermodynamically very expensive. So 98, 99% acacia, but then they started finding olive and then olive wood. Now, olive at this period was not grown in Egypt. You know olive very well in Spain, very Mediterranean. But the Egyptians, yes, it's very Mediterranean. They had to go up to Lebanon and the Levant to get their olive oil. And then our ceramicists, our pottery experts, were finding fragments of combed ware. Combed ware is native to Syria, what is now Israel, Syria, Palestine, Jordan, but especially Lebanon.
Mm-hmm.
And our Syro-Palestinian archaeologists who dig up there in the north at the same time, about 2500 BC, they call it early Bronze 3, they've actually found oil processing installations where everything is combed. And the combed ware jars were like Roman amphora of their time. But nobody had ever found hardly any of this combed ware in Egyptian settlements. Of course, hardly anybody was digging settlements. Everybody's digging the cemeteries. Well, in the cemeteries, in the tombs of the high status people at Giza, they had found like 50 imported combed ware loop-handled jars, the Roman amphora of their time, because olive is precious. You know, that doesn't grow in Egypt. It did later in the Ptolemaic period, in the Greco-Roman period. But and they might have also been importing wine, and we know the Mediterranean, you know, from Spain to Portugal to Italy is great. France too. It's great for its wine. So this was good stuff. This was luxury stuff. So then the question is, why are we finding evidence of olive and pieces of these expensive imported vessels that were bringing in wine, resin, or olive oil in a workers' town? These are workers. And we all have this kind of, Marx left an impression on us, didn't he? We think this is the proletariat. Why would they have the fancy stuff? And our ceramicist, Ania Wojcinska from University of Warsaw, suggested, well, one idea was, oh, the rich people are giving the combed ware back to the poor people so they can reuse it. Yeah, okay, maybe. But I think the better idea, and that Ania Wojcinska suggested, was this an entrepot? This is where everything was coming in and then being redistributed to the high status people, the king's officials, and so on. And then we started looking at these galleries. And were they for lowly grunt workers, common workers, or were they for elite troops? Because we know from scenes in temples and tombs that the same work organization, the same gangs or crews that left their graffiti on the big blocks that they're hauling to build the pyramids, it's the same gangs we see manning the boats that would go up to Lebanon or down to Punt. So we started thinking, this is not just a workers' village. Okay, it is that. It's also the high officials' town who are in charge. But even more than that, it's the international port of its time. So for Americans, I would say what we were finding was like the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, responsible for, and no wonder you have high officials there. And so we actually think it's part of a port city. So it's not just a worker city, it's a port city, it's the official town. It's much more than that, but it is also a workers.
No, it's it's incredible. What it's clear is that traditionally Egyptology has always focused, as you said, in its attention into monumental architecture, right. Temples and tombs, of course. Also because of the state of preservation and the quantity, let's say, of the remains. But urban or domestic architecture, it's also so important, as you were explaining, to find out more, not only about the daily life, but about society as well, about the relationships, the international relationships with countries, surrounding countries. So it's really amazing. I'm afraid we don't have much time. I'm going only to make another question about the at the end of the causeway of Hafra. Now there is a modern village, but probably there are also remains in the side of the Sphinx, all this little town that it's there. Are there any plans to do any archaeological excavations there? I've heard rumors and that they are going to take all that away. I don't know.
What we have found, and I've said it's 7 to 10 hectares. What we have found, there was a huge football pitch covering it, soccer, as we'd say in the United States.
Yeah.
And it was covering a big part of a royal building. And thanks to our colleagues in the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, we were able to, they built a new soccer field for the local people, and we were able to move this. We didn't know, is it a palace? It turned out to be a big storehouse where all the grain was being stored. And I mention that only because this whole complex, including that royal building, continues underneath the modern town to the east. And we also know from the Wadi al-Jarf papyri, discovered by our French colleagues from the Sorbonne and the French Institute, you know, these papyri were discovered on the Red Sea coast at a place called Wadi al-Jarf, at a port of Khufu. And my colleague Pierre Tallet, who's now the director of the French Institute in Cairo, was the point person for this discovery. And the fact that they found a port of Khufu on the Red Sea where they would go to cross the Red Sea to get copper is amazing.
Yeah.
And there are galleries there that look like our galleries, barracks. There are big parking garages for the parts of boats. It's an amazing thing. You really should have Pierre Tallet speak to your podcast.
Yeah.
But between the stones blocking one of these galleries, they found papyrus. And here's to come back to your question. The papyri had nothing to do about the Red Sea and the copper. They were all about building Khufu's pyramid at Giza. And so, to make a long story short, there's nothing.
Yeah, I'm afraid we have to go in like a minute.
Okay,
I'm so
well, the
sorry
papyri actually give the indication that there was a whole city at Giza called Ankh-Khufu, Khufu lives, and that there was a palace there to the north by the Valley Temple of the Khufu Pyramid. So what we have found is just part of a greater city. And your question was, is there any chance we can get the rest of this city? And the answer is yes. Given developments of the whole Giza Plateau undertaken by the Egyptian authorities for developing tourism and preserving archaeology, there is a chance we will be able to excavate more of this lost city of the pyramids.
Okay, that's great to hear. I guess it's a huge project. It's going to be very complicated, but well, let's hope for the best. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry. I would really love to have a longer conversation. You're very easy to talk to, and your conversation is just amazing. But we have to go. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much.
Have you again.
Well, let's do it again.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.